In the late 1980s and early 90s, violent crime was on the forefront of national attention. Beginning in 1987, the homicide rate in the U.S. was increasing by 5% each year, and the media was taking notice. In 1991, it peaked with 9.8 deaths per every 100,000 people. As these statistics gained notoriety, a large percentage of women murdered by a spouse or an intimate partner could not be ignored. In 1992, domestic violence was the leading cause of injury for women between 15 and 44, more than rapes, muggings, and car accidents combined. Activism groups all over the country had called for civil rights action to be taken to protect women in their own homes. In 1990, then Delaware Senator Joe Biden began drafting a bill to address the violence against and provide services to women. Biden enlisted the help of both the Senate Judiciary Committee and several activist groups to draft the bill, including the now Legal Defense and Education Fund. The Violence Against Women Act not only included the first federal law against physical abuse, it also included provisions on rape and abuse that focused on prevention, as well as funding for victim services. The bill also provided an increased focus on access to services for communities of color, female immigrants, and women in Native American communities. The measures that Vawa took to protect women's rights were unheard of in Congress. No bill had ever granted women these actions against their attackers.
On January 2, 1993, the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, was introduced in the Senate as S-11. The congressional makeup at the time was primarily Democratic, with 267 Democratic members and 167 Republican members, respectively, with one independent member. The president at the time was Bill Clinton. When VAWA was introduced, it was read twice to the Committee on Judiciary. Then roughly 9 months later, on September 10, 1993, Joe Biden reported the bill to the Senate with an amendment in the nature of a substitute. This meant that the full text of the bill was replaced and rewritten. VAWA's most controversial provision included a civil rights order that allowed victims of gender-based violence to sue their attackers. Opponents of this provision argued that this private civil rights remedy would bring an overwhelming amount of family disputes into the federal court system where they did not belong. This argument left the bill placed on the Senate legislative calendar under general orders. In 1991, a different bill was being drafted, the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, or the VCCLEA. The bill was drafted and introduced to the House of Representatives by Democratic Texas Representative Jack Brooks. Because of the attention to the rate of violent crimes in the United States, the bill had bipartisan support. The bill implemented tough-on-crime policies such as the 3 strikes mandatory life sentence for repeated offenders, money to hire 100,000 new police officers, $9.7 billion in funding for prisons, and an expansion of death penalty-eligible offenses. Joe Biden co-sponsored the bill alongside several other Democratic representatives. Because of the debate surrounding VAWA's civil rights provision, Joe Biden knew he had to act to pass this bill. Due to the widespread support of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, VAWA became a part of the VCCLEA on October of 1993. On November 3rd, it was amended and passed in the House and placed on the Union calendar. The next day, it was introduced to the Senate, and after some debate, was passed on November 19th with an amendment vote by 95-4. The Senate insisted that the bill should only be passed if amended, so a conference with the House was requested. On April 21, 1994, Jack Brooks moved to support the amendments made by the Senate, while also proposing more amendments to be made by the House. Brooks called a conference at which Representative Bill McCollum debated in order to instruct other members of the House.
The proposed amendments by the House would authorize $10.5 billion for grants for state prison operation and construction while agreeing to the Senate's provisions. The Senate proposed an amendment that would require states to change their laws so that defendants would have to serve more than 85% of their sentence before being released. On May 19, 1994, these provisions were considered by the Senate. After much disagreement upon the amendments made by the House, the Senate requested a conference. The same situation occurred throughout June and July, with amendments from both legislators regarding the amount of funding a prison should receive, admissibility of evidence in sex offense cases, payment of federal benefits to undocumented people, sexually violent predators, U.S. citizens receiving payments from federal programs, prison terms for use, possession, or carrying weapons during state crimes, money available to the U.S. Border Patrol Services, requirements for products labeled as Made in America, and the death penalty. After numerous debates, conferences, and informative sessions from both the House and the Senate, on August 25th, the VCC-LEA was finally passed through Congress after 50% of Congress members agreed on the bill. Finally, on September 12, 1994, VCC-LEA was presented to President Bill Clinton for executive approval. He signed the bill on September 13th, making VCC-LEA public law.
Today, both bills hold historical impacts that have changed the way we live today. The VCC-LEA was the largest crime bill in the U.S. history, and one that shaped Bill Clinton's presidential legacy. Today, many critics of the bill have said that it has contributed to the mass incarceration crisis our prison systems currently face. It has also been addressed that the bill included higher numbers of law enforcement in low-income communities, rather than providing better training to officers and economic resources in these communities.
You ashamed of that bill?
Not at all. In fact, I drafted the bill, as you remember.
I know that.
And by the way, we talk about this mostly in terms of Black Lives Matter. Black lives really do matter, but the problem is institutional racism in America. That's the overall.
Because of these reasons, and many more, many Democrats have now realized the error in the long-term effects of the bill. Bill and Hillary Clinton have both taken major responsibilities for its passing.
Hey, Clinton, my people are still in jail for their crime. You stretched it out, mandatory minimum, and then you want to take pictures of my people here. We're still in jail for what you did.
Thank you.
Since the passing of Vawa and its many reauthorizations, resources and legal action for victims of domestic abuse have improved dramatically. In Vawa's 2000 and 2005 reauthorizations, it improved protections for battered immigrants and sexual assault survivors, and provided an increased focus on access to services for communities of color, immigrant women, and Native American communities. The extensive impact of both the passing of Vawa and the VCC-LEA have paved the way for the systems we have in place today.